So we've been opening with a different one of the 4 Guru Slokas, one for each session. And this is the third. Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Sachidananda Murtaye Nishprabhanjaya Shantaya Niralambaya Tejase. The Guru is auspiciousness, embodiment of truth, knowledge, bliss. Salutations to the one who is beyond the worlds, peaceful, independent, and radiant. Om, om, om. Good. Well, first thing I'll just mention, we're going to go till 9 o'clock tonight. So that's 15 minutes beyond the 8:45 that it says in the description. And our moderators have been kind enough to stay for that. If you have to go, you can pick up the end on the recording. And next week, we're going to go to 9:15. This is in a desperate attempt to try to fit in the ever-expanding list of stories that I seem to have. It's the great danger of doing this is that I just keep thinking of more stories. So I'll start with one that popped into my head in morning meditation today, just since it did, instead of one from the existing list that's too long to get to everyone. And this is just a real simple, very sweet, powerful moment for me. And it was just before the Lotus dedication. I mentioned before that I was privileged to work with Yanam and Abhaya and others with Gurudev in planning the big event back in 1986. And as the big day approached, which, late July is right around now, Guru Purnima time, it came in on the very end of the month. And we had rented the biggest circus tent, which seems quite appropriate to our journey on this path. We're in a circus tent with Gurudev and all these esteemed folks. And we had already rented this tent. I think they may have already erected it. They came out with, a circus tent rigging crew. It was very impressive. They didn't use elephants, but everything short of that. They could have. There were elephants at the dedication itself. There was at least one elephant who was a friend of the ashrams, and for real, not just the stone elephants. In any case, the tent was up, and more people kept registering for this event. And we realized that at the hottest time of the year, and it turned out to be the hottest day in the history of Buckingham County, we were going to have more people than chairs would fit in the tent. And we knew that with the dedication being at noon, everyone had to be sheltered, or we were going to have, some serious medical issues. So in the last second, it didn't seem possible to do anything about this, but this inspiration came, and I think it came through me. I don't know. Everything was a sort of a team thing, but somehow I think that one came through me, and I was able, very atypically for me, to visualize the tent. I'm not great at geometric shape visualization the way architects and many other people are, but I was able to visualize it and visualize putting another circus tent behind the main tent, kind of at right angles, to extend it back and create essentially very much like a Gothic cathedral floor layout, to add it on. So Yanam said, find out what you can. I called the company that we rented the big tent from. And I said, is this possible? Can we just like put it behind and everyone could still see all the way forward to the stage? I said, yeah, we could do it. How much would it cost? They told me, can you do it in time? We need it up before this thing starts. And it might have been 2 weeks. And they said, yes. And here's what it'll cost. I told Yanam, she said, call Gurudev. The call went right through. And I said, Gurudev, we can't fit everyone in the existing tent. Lots of more and more people are registering. There's a way to add another tent onto the existing tent, and it'll extend the seating greatly. And here's what it'll cost. It was a lot of money. And his response was, do it. Just like that. So that's the story. It was one of the great moments in my life because there was that to get to be, on like the A team with Gurudev for that moment and experience what it was really like to be in Lord Rama's, army, so to speak, was a tremendous delight. Yeah, this was an army armed with lotus blossoms. So that's the lotus tent story. And it worked. So lucky we got it too, like I said, because of that heat and drought and bee infestations and food that shouldn't possibly have survived any of that and somehow did without killing anybody or even hospitalizing them, to my knowledge. And speaking of food, I'm just going to go in. I've arranged a little order here. Food, interestingly enough, strangely enough, is like a big issue in life for me, and perhaps for some of you also eat. And you can't seem to get away from it too easily. So Satya and I did a number of Lotus fundraising dinners. That's what that was our excuse to throw these incredibly elaborate meals because we were cooking, for the king. And of course, Gurudev would attend. And lots of people would sign up because they'd get to eat this gourmet meal with Gurudev. Of course, that wasn't the point, as he pointed out after this meal. They were there to be with him, and it didn't matter whether the meal was that good, but it mattered to us. So Satya Greenstone and I are, quite ambitious and pretty good cooks, to be honest, very good. And we had a team of crack cooks working with us, kind of limitless numbers of people and funds and all. So we cooked this one, they were themed, and this one was Chinese, and it was one of the most elaborate meals, I've ever had anything to do with or been around. It was like you were cooking, for a 5-star restaurant. Satya and I did research in Chinese restaurants for months ahead of time to find it. And we really did. We would find a dish that we really liked and figure out how we could recreate that. So we had many, many courses. Ridiculous. It started with a soup that we had never made. You've probably heard of thundering rice or sizzling rice soup, where there's like this dried rice cake and you take it to the table traditionally. We paid attention to all of this, and you pour the relatively clear broth over the rice cakes, which you've created yourself at the table. And if it works right, it makes this thundering sound when the hot soup hits the very dry rice cakes. And we're going nuts in the other room, getting course after course after course to come after that, because we've made handmade dumplings and handmade egg rolls and handmade fortune cookies and all this stuff. And when the soup was served from the other room, the 35 people that could fit in that person's home who had donated their space burst into wild applause. So you can imagine what that felt like from the kitchen. We heard the thunder of the soup. Our crack team of servers was out there, And there was this roar of applause. Anyway, the meal went on and on. People would come back. We couldn't even go out and see what was going on, but they'd come back and say, Gurdjieff likes that. He had seconds of the eggplant with chestnuts, not water chestnuts. Anyway, and he said that it could be used to detonate an atomic bomb because it's so spicy. It was hot. But he asked for more. So go no, because Gurdjieff didn't like very spicy food that much. And at the end of the meal, we passed out fortune cookies, and Prakash had typed quotes from Gurdjieff's teachings. In those days, I think it actually was typing in 1986, or maybe it was on a computer, and cut them apart and fit them in the handmade fortune cookies. We fit them in the handmade fortune cookies that we made, which were way beyond fortune cookies like you get in a restaurant. They were actually good, for one thing, extremely good. So everyone got to come, and Gurdjieff had a big basket of fortunes, and he would pick out the fortune, and the person would come over and receive it as prasad from his hand. So it was quite beautiful, and they would all read the message, which was the message from his teaching. And then they called out the chefs, and we came out, and there was a lot of applause, and it was quite a humbling, if not totally humiliating experience. But we were happy and sweaty and in our aprons. And Gurdjieff picked out one for me, and this is what it said. So he picked it, I opened it, and I had to read it, right? And it said this: you will never progress spiritually until you learn to master the tongue. That was my message. And there's a follow-up to this story. Well, there's two follow-ups. First of all, I think this was might have been the final elaborate meal like this that was cooked anywhere, because Gurdjieff said afterwards, this is too much work. And they're not coming because of your food anyway. They're just coming to be with me. Just get a restaurant and let the restaurant cook the meat, and don't do all that, because we would really kill ourselves for days on the Italian one that we did, and this one and others. So that's one footnote. But the great footnote is that years later, here at Yogaville, when we were all meeting over in LCC, the Lotus Conference Center, the one building that was here when we first moved in, and that's where satsangs would be. So Gurdjieff gave satsang there, and we still have beautiful programs there. It's a very small room compared to Shivananda Hall, but we would cram in. And as he left one day, he he saw me, and I was in the midst of, my usual, decades-long struggle with eating and my weight and everything. And he just looked at me and he said, this is years later, he says, do you remember that fortune that you got that day after that meal? What did that say? Yes, Gurdjieff. And I repeated to him, and he went, I thought, how wonderful that he actually remembers that about me years later. Here's another little food story. Rishi and I at the Connecticut ashram, we're bouncing around in time here, much earlier. We were going through a period where Gurdjieff was experimenting with disciplining us, which was really unusual. We're all 20-somethings in those days, almost everybody. And so he actually had a curfew and a lot of rules for a brief time. I mean, Gurdjieff basically couldn't force people to do things. It was just not in his nature. In his nature was you had complete freedom to come, go, follow. He said it would be very easy. I could make you all have to show up for all the sadhana, but you won't grow from that. I'm not going to do that. In fact, he would make things as difficult as possible by design. So when we had this curfew, Rishi and I were out eating at a very nice little diner that Paul Newman used to eat at when he was racing cars in nearby in Connecticut. It was that good. It was like a really nice place, and they baked great desserts. So we ordered one of their desserts, and it was this cake that came out of it had just come out, and it was hot, and it had like this blueberry compote over the sponge cake and whipped cream. And when we tasted it, this particular Rishi, not one some of you may know, East Coast, he and I had many kind of gourmet sensibility experiences. And when we tasted this cake, we went, oh my God. And the first thought that we had simultaneously is like, Gurudev has to have this cake. This cake is made for a king. So we got on the phone from the restaurant, on the pay phone, before cell phones, of course, and called and got his secretary, Shanti at that time, and we said, listen, we're at the we're at the Burris Motor Lodge, the name of the place, and we just had a cake that is like phenomenal, and we feel like Gurudev has to have it. Can we bring him a piece? Now we're already beyond curfew, and we hear her put the phone down. A little discussion in the background, very quick. And she comes back and he says, bring it. It was thrilling. It was like, do it for the 10. So we got the cake and we got toothpicks to keep the wrapper off of the whipped cream and everything and the sauce. And we, carefully, and this whole delightful violation of the curfew became like this mission to serve Gurudev. We delivered the cake, and I think it was the next day that Shanti delivered the message to us that Gurudev said, tell them that they can violate curfew whenever they want, as long as they bring me cake like this. So that's the another great food story. So I mentioned that I never got to take another retreat after the first retreat fully, because I was always I started taking my second retreat, and like within hours, less than a day anyway, got recruited onto the staff. And I found myself being asked to teach, give a lecture on Raja Yoga. Now, I had been leading little discussion groups. We didn't have a book of Gurudev's in those days. We had transcripts of lectures he'd given at the Universalist Church in New York from the 60s, and this is the very early 70s, and it hadn't been made into a book yet. But we would sit around and discuss it, which is exactly what I'm still doing 50 years later. So I got up as this little kid who'd never given, much of a spiritual lecture, not a lot of public speaking experience, to say the least, although I'd done a little tiny bit. And I'm giving this lecture on Raja Yoga, and atypical of everything that I've done since, I had notes and everything. and it was outdoors in the Santa Cruz Mountains again, like the first retreat. And as I gave the talk, standing at the podium, Gurudev came quietly. It was outdoors, so it wasn't into a building, but into the area, but all the way in the back. And he sat on a chair very inconspicuously so that the whole crowd was facing forward and not even seeing that he was there. And he was leaning against like the side of one of the wooden buildings, barn-like structure, as I recall. And he often had his eyes closed, not like I was putting him to sleep. I don't think it seemed like he was really listening. And I've never forgotten that. What an experience to have him show up like that. And what occurs to me as soon as I was remembering the story is that he showed up. He showed up at my first talk. And ever since then, he's always showed up at every thing that I've ever been asked to say about the teachings. And for years and years, I used to ask him before each class. I would go over to the altar and bow down in a proper way in front of the students, not really thinking of putting on a show. I really wanted to help, but you do it in a kind of dignified way. But in my mind, I would always say, even to fairly recent years, I would always say, "Okay, Gurudev, send the good stuff." That was always my prayer: send the good stuff. And then one fine day, maybe 8-10 years ago, I found myself doing that because I always did that. And I said, why am I even asking? You always send the good stuff. I don't have to ask. You're there. And if you want a tip on teaching, the great tip that I would give is that I learned early on that even Gurudev, the greatest orator that I've ever known, could make it really tough sometimes. I mean, he could thrill and entertain you, and that's what he did, 90% of the time. And even when he was tough, he could thrill and entertain you. But once in a blue moon, much less than 10% of the time, but once in a blue moon, he would make it really hard and really dry. And, I'm a person who sits bug-eyed, drinking in every word. But it occurred to me in my own teaching career that, well, if Gurudev could make it hard, dare I say, not ideally interesting, why am I worried about how my talk is going to go over? That has served me very well. I just said, well, he's the one doing the teaching anyway, and if he wants to make it not that much fun, he'll make it not that much fun. Hard to do with these stories, though, because they're so filled with his great energy. So here's some other times that I taught in front of him, just two others that come to mind right away. He would go through experiments where I'm not teaching anymore. I'm not coming to satsangs. You people have to do them, or variations of that. And we went through iterations of that. Again, mostly when we were all in our 20-somethings back in Connecticut. And on one occasion, he did various experiments where he had he would turn to us and take a question that had been given, and different people were asked to get up and give their answer. And I was one of them on this occasion. And I got up and I told a story, and it just what a thrilling feeling to see him laughing heartily and loving this story. I told the following Nasruddin story, one of my favorites. Nasruddin was this great Sufi sage who people took to be a fool. And he was anything but a great enlightened master. So he heard that this kingdom was in terrible shape because the king had decided to make everyone speak the truth. And that was what the question had been about, is the person was very confused about what is really true from the absolute point of view compared to, what's true in the worldly level. So I got up and told this story. So Nasruddin hears that this king has decided, I'm going to make everyone in the kingdom honest. And that way my kingdom will be so virtuous. And I'm going to do this by setting up guards at the gates to the kingdom. And everyone who comes in, they'll ask them a question. And if they tell the truth, they'll be admitted. And if they lie, there's going to be a gallows right inside. They'll be taken straight to the gallows and executed. So he hears about this, and I don't think he said oy vey, but he said probably the Sufi equivalent of that. He took pity on these people and decided to go to the kingdom, or friends intervened and got him to go, and got to do something about this. So he approached the gate and to enter, and like everybody else, and of course he was always dressed like a ragamuffin anyway, so they didn't think he was anybody big and important. They said the question that they chose to ask him as his test, his life or death test, was where are you going? And he said, I'm on my way to be hanged. And they said, he's lying, hang him. And then they said, but if we hang him, he's telling the truth. And then smoke came out of their ears, I imagine, as they tried to compute what they were supposed to do. And Nasruddin said, that's what I think of your relative truth. And the king heard about this, saw the error of his ways, and lifted his rule. But Gurudev loved that story. So that was an example of the fun that we had when he let us play at being teachers in front of him. And on another occasion, he got a whole bunch of us to get up and answer different people's questions. This was in the Shivananda Hall that was in Connecticut, that Madhu was reminiscing about recently, this big carriage house where we used to have our gatherings. And somebody asked a question about their heart being broken. They had found they couldn't find anybody that they could really rely on, and what they wanted to love, but they didn't feel like they could have that trust because they had found people to be so unreliable. And Gurudev called on different ones of us on this occasion. It wasn't a question so much of volunteering, and people got up and gave their answer, and he asked me to go up, and I did, and I said essentially this. Maybe I said it a little bit eloquently, but I don't want to strain myself tonight. So the essence of it was this. I said, why not rely on the ever reliable one? And Gurudev's sitting there, and he says, somewhat grumpily like this, he says, that's what I was going to say. So you always showed up. That's the point. All right, now on to one of the most sublime moments in my career with my life in Satchidananda. Gurudev had given one of his spectacular public lectures in a church in New York, huge crowd, thrilling everyone hanging on every word, including me. And I was lucky enough to be in the car driving him back to where he was going to stay. I wasn't the driver. I was in the back seat. And Gurudev was sitting in the front passenger seat, of course, and he had his head leaned back. I mean, he had just really put out this tremendous amount of energy, led some chanting, given a talk for an hour and a half, whatever it was, or more, and back in the 70s, 1970s. And he had his eyes closed. It had rained while we were in there. It hadn't rained in the church, but not earlier. So the street was glistening, and we were going down, I think, Fifth Avenue, and it had rained and stopped, and it was fairly late at night in New York. Lots of lights, lots of shop windows, right? But generally closed, and everything was sparkling and looked gem-like. And I looked around, and I don't know what possessed me, because he was resting and he had just put out all this energy, so you shouldn't disturb him. I knew that much. but something possessed me. And I just said, Gurudev? And without opening his eyes, he went, which I knew meant, okay, the door's open. I wanted to ask a question. And I said, because it looked so real. That's what struck me, the way everything was shining. And I said, is it really true that none of this is real? And again, without opening his eyes, he went, I may not be doing it quite right, but there was no question by his intonation that he was saying yes. And I said, because I've always loved Jnana Yoga, at least at this level that I'm describing. I love it. For me, what is a very juicy level of Jnana Yoga. I like having my mind blown. So I said, so I went a little further. I had gotten 2 hmms, no open eyes, and I went, how is it done? Which is that's called chutzpah in Yiddish. But I wasn't finished. I said, how is it done? Is it like a magic trick? And he said words that I will never forget. I'm drawing it out a little just so that you can feel how I felt at that moment. And he just said this. I said, how is it done? Is it like a magic trick? And he said, eyes still closed. More like hypnosis. And that's it. Yeah. That explained everything to me that could be explained about the reality which is beyond words. Because hypnosis is all done with thought, right? And you fight fire with fire. So I have a whole little drosh on that. So if you ever, drosh is what Jews call, an interpretive Talmudic reading. So if you ever come to a talk I give on Jnana Yoga, or you'll hear my version of Jnana Yoga based on that. Yeah. So more like hypnosis. Wow. Gurudev used to heal with laughter. I think if I had to pick the one thing that I loved most about being in his presence, it was the laughter. There was a lot of laughter. He could make me laugh like no one, like your best friend, master, your own highest comedian inside, everything all at once. But especially if you were ailing. So I actually got hiccups bad enough. It's called intractable hiccups, when they don't just go away in a few hours years ago. And they went on and on and on. I called my friends who knew homeopathy, and that didn't work. Nothing worked. None of the home remedies hurt. And you might think this is nothing, but it's actually considered fairly serious. And if it goes on long enough, it gets very distressing, because your diaphragm gets exhausted and your gastrointestinal system really acts up. I had to go to the emergency room. And I went to the emergency room, and I had a very traumatic time. They have a drug that they administered incorrectly. I looked it up afterward in the physician's desk reference and found out that it said that if you were going to resort to this drug to stop hiccups, that you should only do it by slow drip infusion. And I heard them hook it up and go push, which is what they do when they inject it all at once into the IV. And what that resulted in is me almost dying really quickly. It's like I couldn't even open my eyes. I could just hear, and I was going, I can't find me. That's about all I got out of it. And they're going, raise his feet. And they tilted the table I was on, I had my feet way up in the air because my blood pressure dropped so low. And there was like a little panic moment. Then I spent a long, torturous time trying to get out of there and get home because they really wanted me to get out of the bed, and I couldn't even open my eyes for the longest time. And they wheeled me out to the car for Lakshmi to drive home, and I can't even remember anything from the drive home. And when we got home, an hour away, I got out of the car on all fours. This is how they don't want to keep you in the emergency room. And I crawled up the 4 steps to our porch, or is it 3 steps, whatever it is, and crawled into our living room of our present house and up into the bed. I always advise people, if you feel really sick, crawl into bed. You know, don't get in a normal, get in on all fours and crawl. There's something wonderfully therapeutic about that. So Gurudev spoke to me the next day, to my surprise, and because it's not like he would just call up and say hello. I didn't have that relationship ever with him, but there was some excuse. We spoke, and I described what I had gone through, and he said, well, he said, it's not like you were going to die from that. And as soon as he said that, I burst out laughing, and he burst out laughing on the other end of the phone. This thunderous, total release, and I felt completely healed. And then he quietly told me, he said, I've had that problem, you know, because I told him about the hiccups, and he said, yes, I've had that problem. And he said it means too much heat is built up in the system. And yeah, he told me that on like 3 different occasions about bizarre ailments I had. He would go, yes, I've had that. And it'd make you feel so much better. Oh, my master had that. Well, I guess I'm not such a schlub for almost apparently dying. A friend of mine told us afterwards that they knew, a close friend of mine, that they knew somebody who had died of intractable hiccups. So Gurudev went right for it. You weren't going to die of that. And of course, that's what your ultimate concern about the body tends to be. So, on another occasion, he said a very similar thing, because I had had a horrible time with painkillers after some botched ankle surgery. It wasn't botched in the total sense, but something that would have been tolerable was made much less tolerable by putting on a cast too tight. They put on the cast after the surgery to repair a ligament. So you're in this cast that feels like 2 cinder blocks being cranked shut onto this surgery. So I better not describe this. It will make us all sick. And I spoke to him afterwards about, you know, the painkillers that they gave me and how it made matters worse and how I couldn't handle it and at all once I took them, and how I'd had a terrible reaction to them. By the way, I'm not preaching against painkillers. I'm just telling you what I experienced on that occasion. Although I could preach if you want some other time. But I would never, say that under no circumstances. And again, Gurudev cured that with laughter. He said, it's not like it was going to kill you. It was the same thing. I only realized that when I was reviewing this. They were separated by many years. He said, well, it's not like it was going to kill you. And we both shared this big hearty laugh about it because, you know, I sort of kind of felt like it was, you know. So, but I mean, the big laugh of that, of course, is that you can't, as my revered buddy, Reverend Jagannath, said about when he had to undergo a very tricky procedure once. He said that he suddenly got this realization while he was being worked on. He had to be conscious for this bizarre surgery that he had to go through, and a rare thing. And he said that he suddenly realized, I can't die. A good realization. He wasn't saying that his body couldn't die. He was saying, I can't die. So healing with laughter. So here's a story about another type of healing, psychic healing. Prakash and I don't know whether she was living in the Washington, D.C. IYI when this happened. I think so. I think she was already living there. I had taught, as a matter of fact, a Raja Yoga course class one night, again, 1970s. And miraculous things happen in those classes sometimes, you know. One time I turned to and gestured to the flowers next to me, and I said, everything in this universe is conscious. It shares the same consciousness as us. It's all living, like these flowers. I said that, and the flower bouquet at that exact moment went. The whole bouquet just went like that, and everyone there, including me, just fell into this deep meditation. So after one of these, I mean, we were in the middle of talking about stuff, but we just stopped. So if this happens now, I'm just going to keep telling stories. I'm not going to stop dramatically to go into samadhi. Better to live in samadhi, I always say. But in any case, after one of these great classes, and it really was, as I recall, it already felt very elevated. So the students left. Prakash and I weren't done talking about the nature of things, and we started to push in. It started casually. We started to talk about the Purnamada chant, you know, which says that is full, this also is full. We used to translate it, this fullness is projected from that fullness. And even after this fullness is projected from that fullness, all that remains is fullness. It's like core Vedanta teaching. You could go on for the rest of your life about fullness, which is also what integral yoga is all about, fullness. It's pretty much everything. So we started pushing in on that idea and thinking about it and thinking, yeah, that's really the key to everything, the projection. And we started pushing in just a little bit more and more. And we got into this very trippy discussion of fullness and projection and the nature of projection. Basically, you know, that same sort of question, how does it all done? How does it work? And we pushed. I can remember just how it felt. It felt like we were straining at the border of something, you know, at the membrane of something and pushing against it. And at a certain point, it wasn't just a trippy discussion anymore. It was a trip. And we were both tripping like we were on psychedelics, and we didn't have big psychedelic careers like people you would expect to have flashbacks and all of that. And at first, we didn't even realize it. And then when we realized it, we had gone out for a walk in the neighborhood, and I think to get some food. I know to get some food. Of course, food was involved, and you got to eat when you're up late studying philosophy. So we realized, like, oh, we're in trouble. You know, we were having, you know, like a premature kind of Kundalini experience, and as soon as we realized we were in trouble, we said, let's go back. Let's go back. We could barely think at this point. Coherent thinking had gone out the window, and went back to the Institute, and without even having to say that that's what we were going to do, we went straight into the meditation room of the Washington, D.C. IYI, and we plopped ourselves in front of the altar, very uncomfortable by now. It had gone on for quite a while, and we were out of control of our minds, and seemingly out of nowhere. And we said, we got to do some Triambakams to Gurudev. So we sat, we looked at Gurudev's picture, and, you know, Om Triambakam, healing mantra. So, which, by the way, is called the Mahamrityunjaya mantra, meaning the great victory over death again. So we went mantra. So we're going to do Triambakams. So we start It would start normally, Om, Triambakam Yajna. We didn't get that far. We went, Om. And as soon as we got that first Om out, looking at Gurudev in front of the altar, like that, boom, like throwing a switch. It was turned off. Everything was completely back to normal. And we were in peace, which, by the way, is much better than wild excitement of any kind, at least in my experience. So we slept. And the next day, Gurudev did something that I told you already. He never had occasion to call me. And it really seemed, I used to sleep in the office on the floor in those days. That was my bedroom, so to speak. And it really seemed in retrospect, or even at the time, that he had made up an excuse to call me. He gave me some mission to do something at the embassy with some paperwork that wasn't the sort of thing that he ever asked me to do before or after, but it seemed like he just wanted to touch base. So he gave me the assignment, and then I said, oh, Gurudev, last night, here's what happened. So I described that whole scene that I just described to you, and I said, as soon as we sat in front of your picture and got out that one Om, we were completely, fine. We were back to normal. And he said on the phone, he went, that's what I'm there for. He just wanted to confirm that. And he wanted to confirm one other thing for inquiring minds, because I said to him, I know, Gurudev, that you've taught that if you push too hard in bhakti, it's not a good idea to chant and dance wildly. He said it's very easy to prematurely stimulate the Kundalini. Anyone can do it just by too much vigorous chanting, or even jumping up and down too much, or whatever. Nothing wrong with chanting and spirited chanting, but straining. I said, I knew your teaching that you could strain in bhakti and prematurely stimulate Kundalini. And his teaching on that, by the way, is that the problem is when it's premature, it goes up suddenly and then it drops suddenly. So you get all this extra energy, and then when it drops to your normal level, which is usually lower chakra energy, and that gets very intensified when it drops. That's a whole nother teaching. But I said, I knew that you taught that could happen through bhakti, but I never knew that you could do that by straining with the intellect. And he said, yes, or absolutely, or something like that. He just wanted to let me know that there was no doubt about that. So when you feel like you're right on the verge of understanding the secrets of the universe, it might not be a bad time to just back off and say, hey, heaven can wait. I don't have to push to get this. What good is it going to be if I have to push to get it? It's like tearing a rosebud apart to make it bloom. Not a good idea. So, okay, on to other most profound moments. I'm telling you, several of my most profound moments. Certainly that More Like Hypnosis was one. The other is famous to anybody who's had to listen to me tell stories, but I'd be very remiss not to tell it. And this was a major initiation in my life. And it was Guru Purnima time, which it is now. As you know, Guru Purnima is the full moon in July. It's this coming weekend, which is why it's so great that we get to do that this week, and to tell stories. And Gurudev was given his Guru Purnima address. And at a certain point in his talk, he said, the best way to free yourself from Maya's thrall, I'm going to pause there. He's going to finish that sentence. Okay, thrall means like that's, a Victorian English way of saying, like you're enthralled, thrall, you're under the spell of something, as in hypnosis. So Maya is the illusion of separateness, the illusion that you're body and mind rather than infinite spirit. I mean, we got no problems whatsoever, according to, the real teachings. If you know who you are, you've got no problems at all. It's the end of suffering, So he's saying the best way, and Maya, every story about Maya lets you know that Maya is all powerful. This is God tricking God into forgetting that God is God. That's a whole nother, that's a big talk. So I'm not going to do that now, but it's very tricky stuff. Very, very powerful. And when he says the best way to free yourself from Maya's thrall, he speaks slowly generally, and he paused long enough for me to go, oh my God, freeing yourself from Maya's thrall, that's enlightenment. And that's, that's the goal of life, certainly the goal of my life. And he's about to tell it. He's just said the best way to do that, and he's about to tell us. So I'm sitting there on the floor in Shivananda Hall at his feet. He's sitting up there on the stage, and he says that. And I remember just leaning forward and my eyes bugging out. And if I had been a cartoon, my tongue would have rolled out and saliva would have dripped off. I wanted to, oh my God, he's going to tell us this. So it was an initiation, major initiation. And he finished the sentence like this. He said, the best way to free yourself from Maya's thrall is to always remember and din into your consciousness, I am happiness personified. And that was it. That's one of the great mantras of my journey in this lifetime, because that frees you of everything. If you remember that, and he said exactly what to do, too. He's giving you a practice. He's not just saying, oh, here's the truth. What good does that do you if you're not experiencing it? No, he was giving a very precise thing. Always remember, right? And din into your consciousness. Din means to drive it in forcefully, to repeat it forcefully, and always remember it. Anyway, that's one of the watchwords of my life. I like to say that as soon as I wake up in the morning. I say the mantra, and I am happiness personified. And after a certain number of hundreds of thousands of times, you might find yourself saying that and thinking, oh, maybe I don't have to run after happiness from outside, which is the cause of all suffering. Speaking of happiness, another great moment, San Francisco IYI. So this is earlier for me, early 70s, sitting in the beautiful front room of the Victorian mansion that is the SFIYI. Gurudev's sitting in the corner, having satsang with us. I think it was on his Jayanti, so it was another one of these holy guru days. And we were all crowded in there, and we had all gotten up on our feet at the end of his talk around him, and we all linked arms, arms on shoulders, hugging and swaying. And don't ask me why. I mean, we often sing Let Us Walk Together and things like that. We may have sung that, but I know for sure that what we ended up singing was Happy Days Are Here Again. So we're singing, Happy Days Are Here Again. Somebody knew the words well enough that we were able to do more than one line. And we were going and we were swaying back and forth, and we were feeling ecstatic, and we were flushed with joy. Again, we're almost all early 20-somethings, some teens. And so there was like this bliss and excitement of being in his presence and being with our beloved friends and fellow seekers, and there was just that ecstatic feeling, and we fell silent, and we were standing there just smiling and beaming at him, and he was beaming at us, and he leaned forward and he said, he said, you know, this feeling of happiness that you're feeling right now is like a single spark in front of the blazing sun compared to the bliss that you will always experience when you know your real nature. So happiness personified, not a bad thing, not a bad thing to remember and aspire towards, but much better than aspiring is to be given a technique. Once he was giving satsang, I love the experiences that I had when he was speaking, and he would let us participate to some extent and or spontaneously. And Gurudev was very fond of telling us over and over again. He was saying, I don't know why you keep coming to listen to me. He says, I keep on saying the same stories over and over, and I don't know what, you know. So he this was like a refrain that he would have. And on this one occasion, he said, I'm always just telling you the same stories. And he finished saying that. I have to explain where what happened came from. It came from the fact that, as far as I was concerned, and I'm pretty sure everybody else felt this way, you know, I didn't care at all about whether I heard the same teaching or the same story. After all, you have to always remember it and din it into your consciousness anyway. God knows I wasn't getting it from one repetition. So he said that. So out of that moment of like delight, like, are you kidding? Who cares if it's the same? You know, it's you. You know, that's what matters. You know, it's you who are what I am in reality. Anyway, that's a whole nother talk again. So he said that the same, and I shouted fairly loud to be heard because I was pretty far back in this big crowd of hundreds of people, and I shouted out, I said, Gurudev, you never said. He had just said, what have I done different? What do I ever say that's different? It's just the same. I said, Gurudev, you never said same quite as long before. And there was this explosion of laughter from him and everybody there. It was true. I just spoke the truth. And he laughed. And there was somebody who had known me from years before visiting. We had lived together in DC, and he said, who better to say this than Padma? You know, so it was like this incredible moment. And it meant a lot to that person too, because for whatever reason, they felt very close to me too. A couple more little food things. Food, I could go on telling you stories about me and food and Gurudev. I already told you the most important one. You will never progress spiritually until you learn to master the tongue. Not excel spiritually, just even progress. But some of the food stories were just fun. Going to a restaurant with him was really a rare treat. And I was in Florida, and we went to this Italian restaurant late at night, a big table of us. We had been touring Disney World. I'll tell you the Disney World experience maybe in the last week if we have time. And they brought out the salad. And Gurudev didn't like, I told you, normally didn't like hot spice or spicy peppers. And they brought out the salad, and it was a nice Italian restaurant, so the salad was a little fancy, and it had little pepperoncini peppers like you always see in a Greek salad, you know, which you can just eat. I mean, you know, I'm not courageous. I'm not going to bite a habanero or even a very hot jalapeno, but a pepper cheese. So Gurudev is picking them out of his salad because he doesn't eat hot peppers. And I was sitting, it was nice. I was sitting right next to him. He was at the head of the table here, and I was sitting right here. And I said, "Oh, Gurudev," I said, "these are pepperoncini peppers. They're really not that hot." And he said, "You eat them, sir." So I love that. And in the same meal, we were bought family style big platters of food. So I was serving him from a platter of food, something that was Parmesan. It might have been eggplant Parmesan or something like that, that had a lot of melted mozzarella on top. And I was doing it a little timidly at first, and the cheese was stringing out and not getting to his plate really well. And then I did it the way you always see, really good, servers that are polished do it. And I took it and I went like this, to get the cheese to break. And then I served it, no mess, no fuss. And he leaned over and he said, "You should always do it like that." So I had done it the timid way, and it hadn't worked. And then I had done it the bold, professional way. And he said, so he was ready to give a lesson, a little bit more than how to serve something with stringy cheese, I think. So that's another food one. Okay, and then from that, let's go to something kind of spectacularly seemingly sober. So a guru was trying to steal me and some other people who already lived in the Institute and considered Gurudev our guru, to steal us away, and doing it in a subtle way, not ever putting down Gurudev or anything like that, but we're getting an invitation to move to India and live in this guru's ashram and to receive initiation, even though they know that we're already initiated by somebody else. And we didn't know what to do. And we were very confused about this. So we talked it over and we said, "Oh, I know what we can do. We'll ask Gurudev, because, we know he'll give us the right answer about whether we should go." And obviously it's clear, but in retrospect, but at the time it wasn't clear. It was more like hypnosis. We didn't know what we were doing, but we knew that we trusted him and that we would go to Gurudev to ask, and yet still thought that it was a question, when it should be perfectly clear, like he was our guru. So, but his guru etiquette was that he wasn't going to intervene if we wanted to leave. But we asked really earnestly, and we had somebody intervene for us, a good guru bhai of ours, and who Gurudev listened to intently about what was going on. We were told afterward. So it was a full moon. It was a nighttime satsang outdoors in Santa Cruz Mountains again, where so many of these pivotal things happened in my life, and was totally confused. And he answered a question that somehow I knew, when he was pulling out cards that questions were written on, that this wasn't written on there. And it was a very specific question about something that this guru did. And he just, he read this question that I'm sure wasn't there, and he just blasted that in a way that he normally wouldn't. But we really had pleaded for help through our intercessor, and they had done a good job. So he said that, and then he burst into a kirtan that I never heard him do as a kirtan at satsang. You know, in our kirtan chants, of the kirtan chants, he almost exclusively did Hari Om or Om Shanti at the end of a talk. That was it. And he did another mantra without saying what it was. It wasn't the common one that you would do, and it was the exact inverted order of mantra, of the mantra that this guru gave people to do. So it was the reverse. And not only that, but the mantra that Gurudev chanted that night, and in all my years with him, the only time I heard him chant it was the mantra that I had told you about in our first get-together, that he had spontaneously initiated me into on that first retreat, and that repeated constantly for me. And, you know, I was basically in bliss continuously that whole time. It was that mantra, and it was the inverse. And then he finished, and when he finished, we looked up, and it's late at night, and the clouds parted overhead, and the full moon shone through. And we were in silence, but we looked at each other, and then later we compared notes very quickly. And it turned out that in that moment, the whole, you know, like the scales falling from your eyes, we were completely free of this, like, what? Like we'd been under a spell, and the spell had been lifted. So, yeah, he would do that, but only you had to really, really ask for it. Otherwise, it was like, let me buy you the ticket. Speaking of mantras, in Connecticut ashram years later, he took a group of us who he was going to, I hesitate to talk about this because it's so sensitive and precious, but I think it's an important story to share. He initiated us into, he was telling us how to perform mantra initiations as his instrument. Because he said, you know, to this day, he does all the mantra initiations. They're done through designated folks who are his instrument, you know. And the mantra he was giving us to use was different than what we had been initiated into by him years before. Different ones for different people. And in any case, he had us all sitting in his study, and he started talking to us about it, and he started saying what the mantra would be, and the energy in the room was unbelievable. It was just shimmering with energy. And someone in the room said, well, could you initiate us into that? You know, like we had been initiated before, because initiation is often done by touch. It's normally done by touch. It can be done many other ways, but he would always do it by a touch on the head. So they were asking very beautifully and respectfully, just, you know, can you initiate us, wanting that experience? And I immediately felt like, no, that's already that's just happened. That's what just happened. And that's what he said. He said, that's what I'm doing. And he never needed to touch us. And I'll just tell you that from having done another mantra for years, from the moment that I received the new mantra, all of that energy went right into the new mantra. I never thought about the previous mantra from him. A great mantra. Never thought about it again. All the energy just went in. So that's the power of initiation by just thought and speech. That's what the great masters can do. And their speech, the Guru Sloka we'll do next week says, mantra mulam gurur vakyam. The root of mantra is the Guru's word. It has tremendous power. He once, Gurudev, reports were not good about me. I was president of the ashram and had gotten pretty tamasic and very overweight. And he called me up to express his displeasure with this. And he said to me, "Stop eating." And I said, "So should I fast, Gurudev?" And he said, "Drink lots of water." And just by his saying that, I had done some fasting before that on my own, so to speak, very much. It's never on your own. But on that initiation, empowered a 35-day water fast, during which I was doing very heavy physical labor most days of the week. I'm talking about loading dump trucks with, logs that weighed, over 100 pounds, lifting them over your shoulder, over your head, and doing that on water for 35 days. From him saying, "Stop eating, drink lots of water." So he went from being very displeased with me to saluting me, the way you would salute a guru or something. And he followed every moment of that fast with me. He kept checking with me, told me exactly when to break it, exactly how to break it. Very surprising what he had me do. So another initiation. Now just a couple of fun things from the Dallas retreat. Speaking of initiate, I wasn't thinking of these themes. I just kind of threw together this order. But, Gurudev always shows up, so it's his order. And I just realized that this was the retreat where I received mantra initiation to begin with after a long odyssey. And it was in Dallas. It was in, countryside outside of Dallas, beautiful place. And he would always have, I told you, freak out nights, he called them, would be the Saturday night before the Sunday morning when retreats ended. He wanted us to have these big parties and break our silence that way by having sharings of music and dance and poetry and this, that, and the other. And we were in this giant barn. Barns figured a lot into our speaking of circus tents being appropriate, barns seem to have been very appropriate for us also. Take what you want from that. So we're in this big barn with very high ceilings, and people are dancing and singing wildly. At the end, he was encouraging us to really blow off steam after our days of silence. And somebody brought him a Roman candle. I like to say that it may have been lit. Roman candle is a firework, and it's big. It's a big tube. It might be like that long, the one that they gave him. And it shoots it shoots brightly lit fireballs high up into the air. And this is indoors inside of a barn. And I think that they lit it and handed it to him. And Gurudev got up and stood on his chair like the Statue of Liberty. I can't do it properly in this little frame, but it's like straight up. He's holding this Roman candle, and it's the place is filling with smoke, and it's shooting fireballs up to the ceiling of the barn, like 10, 12. And then when the last one goes off, and no more are coming out, and everyone's just going wild and choking a little bit, but not too bad. When the last one is done, how can I show you this? He like slowly shrills back down gracefully into the cross-legged position that he started in as it goes out. That's the kind of fun we had. There was a piano against the stage, and one of the days, it might have been that same night. No, I think it was when he gave one of his talks. There was a piano just sitting there because, you put on a show in a barn, right? So naturally, they had a piano, but it wasn't used the whole time until somebody might have performed on it on the Freakout night. I'm not sure. But one of the days when he finished talking, he just walked across the front of the stage, past the piano, and as he went by, he just went like this to the keys, and beautiful music came out, I'm a kid who, used to fool around with my aunt's piano whenever I went over to her house. We didn't have one, and try to make sounds. And it was astonishing. And, it's not like he was trained to be a pianist. At least I've never seen that in any of his bio. But it was astonishing. Just as he walked by, it came out perfectly. Yeah. A few time miracles. I mentioned in the beginning, in case you came late, that we're going to go till 9 tonight. If you can't stay till 9, you can always check the recordings afterward. And next week, we're going to go till 9:15. And I still won't finish everything on this list, which keeps getting longer. Here's a couple of time miracles that are nice. Everyone in the Berkeley IYI piles into the VW van, and we're driving. It's interesting how often Santa Cruz comes up. There must be something to that. But we're going down to Santa Cruz. We have to go over the Santa Cruz Mountains to get down to Santa Cruz because Gurudev is going to give satsang there. And this was great. Wherever he was on the West Coast, you went if you possibly could. And we were a little late leaving, and we were overloaded. And, those VW vans couldn't, with a tailwind going downhill, they might hit 45, but it was miserable weather. And for a long part of it, it was dense fog. So we were tracking our miles per hour. We knew the route. We knew the length of time that it should take and when the talk was to begin. And we knew that we couldn't make it. No way, not even remotely close. We weren't going to just be a little bit late. And we prayed to Gurudev then and there and just said, we'd so much love to hear your talk, but it seems like there's no way we can make it. So we're coming anyway. And we're sorry we're late. So we prayed like that. And we arrived, and we walked in, and everyone was gathered, and Gurudev began his talk and gave his talk on time. And we were there. And it was impossible. So after the talk, we went, the whole contingent got to go and see him. And we went in a little private room with him, and we told him that story. And he just totally acknowledged it. He just went, well, that's what. Like that. I think that's what he said. That's what. there's a lot of stories like that about the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, and other great masters, where time gets warped. And another time warpage story, Abhayanandaji and I were on the West Coast and had been reassigned to, this is when I got to go to the Washington, D.C. IYI, and she got to go, I can't remember, I think she was going to a New Jersey one. I maybe have that wrong. But we got the same ride across as penniless yogis. We found somebody who wanted someone to share the trip with them. And we're driving across the country, this time in a VW Bug, 3 of us with all of our possessions. And there's quite a story about that, because he kept saying, this fellow who was not an integral yogi or a yogi per se, but gave us the ride. He kept saying, it's made it across the country. She's made it, 6 times, and she'll make it another 6 times. And I went, oh no. You could just feel that. And that car, because we took turns driving, when you floored it, it went 45, and we were on interstates. And I'm talking floored it in a, on a level road. So but that's a whole nother story. The engine didn't blow up until we got to Arkansas, but whole nother story. But our route went close enough to the Grand Canyon, and none of us had seen the Grand Canyon. And we calculated ahead of time that that flat out 45 top speed, that we'd be there. Unfortunately, we couldn't stop. We didn't have the money for motels or anything. So we'd be there at a couple hours after sunset. We looked up sunset and last light and all those good things. And there was no way. It was impossible. So we prayed to Gurudev and out loud, and we said, Gurudev, we'd sure love to see the Grand Canyon if we could. And we know it's impossible, but we'll drive that way anyway. And if by some miracle we did get to see it, we were very Vedic about this, as in the Vedas. We said, if by some miracle we do get there, we'll make offerings to you. We pulled up at the Grand Canyon. There was nobody around. We kept seeing signs for the Grand Canyon. We kept seeing the mileage, and we kept looking at our speed and the time. And this wasn't like Santa Cruz. This was impossible, and it was impossible every step of the way. We pulled up, and the sun was just setting, and there was no one around. So I don't know whether we were taken to an alternate Grand Canyon universe or whatever. And our minds were totally blown. And we thanked Gurudev, and we offered some fruit we had into the Grand Canyon, hopefully not killing any, late night hikers who might be below. I learned a great lesson on that occasion, because I tried to embrace the Grand Canyon. I was always trying to take in everything my whole life, long before formally being into yoga. I wanted to feel it, and I couldn't. It was too big. It blew my mind when I was, 100 feet from the edge where you can see the depth. It's you see the other side and you go, oh my God. And then you realize that what you're seeing is this out of, as you walk closer and closer, out of that, you're seeing this and having your mind blown. So what I experienced there was when I gave up trying to take it in with my senses and just sat down and meditated, I became one with it. Could hear the heartbeat of the Grand Canyon. It was quite wonderful. One time I gave a talk here in Shivananda Hall, and it was on overcoming obstacles. They would give us, these great assignments. And I was paired with Radha Metro, who was a fiery teenage orator. And she was talking about putting her arm through the microphone. It was a heavy, not like these thin ones, but a heavy, old-fashioned metal, that if I really believe I could, pass my arm right through it. And I gave more of a philosophical talk on, there are no obstacles. You can overcome them all. They're all opportunities, this, that, and the other like that. And as Gurudev went to leave, I was standing and he was standing right in front of me crossing, and he said, Paramon, you shouldn't just preach this. You should do it. And I don't know why, but wanting to defuse the situation somehow decided this is a good time for a joke. This is the way the egoic mind works to try to protect itself. So I said, yes, Gurudev, I'll start tomorrow. I thought this was funny, and he looked at me, and I looked into his eyes, and saw the other side of the universe. He looked straight through me, and he just said, begin, he repeated. Yeah. So we got time for one more. Oh, here's a nice one. At the Lotus dedication, we had these vast plans with all these dignitaries and all these famous artists, one of whom was Paul Horn, who even long before this was one of my favorite. He was this incredible flautist who had played in the Taj Mahal and in the pyramids and had all these famous albums doing that. He played that night in Lotus just for a few of us to see what the acoustics were like. We got to be there with him, which was fun. But we had all this organization and all these crack, minutia type minds, lining up all this stuff. And from my point of view, at least, it was like wonderfully, completely chaotic. Once things started, it was just like Garuda was buzzing back and forth in the helicopter, which was going to be used for Gurudev to hang out of, to pour the abhishekam, the holy liquid offerings from a puja over the top of incredibly dangerous, over the top of the Lotus, all this craziness with the helicopters buzzing back and forth. And I turned to somebody and said, Apocalypse Now was a favorite of ours from years before. And I said, this is Beatitude Now. It really felt like that, the sound of the chopper, thousands of people, and, just complete chaos from my point of view of everything that we had planned. I had spent months making signs for all the locations and the booths and going over it again and again, and had teams of people to put them up and to make them, and none of the signs went up. Everything. So we're in the final procession after all these dignitaries have done the puja, created the abhishekam, Gurudev has poured it, and now he's in a procession with, Yogi Bhajan and great Zen leader and Rabbi Gelberman and, all these people, Wallace Black Elk of all these different religions. We're going up the path to go into Gurudev, and we come to the elephants that are there, the elephant statues, and everything had been planned in detail because you had to, show proper respect and give things for everyone to do. So we got up, and there was somebody for each elephant. They were covered with sheets that were going to be, undraped, and that would be one of the things, honorific things that you could give somebody to do. So we got up there, and Paul Horn was to do the left-hand one, which is still a favorite of mine of the two. And we said, Paul Horn is supposed to do this? Well, where is he? There's thousands of it. Nobody knows. It's not his fault, by the way, at all. And Gurudev just turns to the crowd, and I'm right next to him because I've got the honor of leading chants at each of these spots. And he said, well, is there somebody here who is named Paul or whose name, used to be Paul. He actually said that like that, sort of over my head. And I went, I was. He said, you do it. So I grabbed the sheet, and the whole thing didn't cost us more than like 5 seconds. And we proceeded on. So it's 9 now, so let's do a little closing chant. Thank you for listening and giving me this opportunity to, what is this for me? I don't know. I don't know what it is. It's sure stirring up a lot of memories. The more this goes on, the more I feel like I don't just have, I thought I had 60 stories, and I counted them and I had 91. Since we've been doing it, it's like every memory of mine seems like it's another Gurdjieff story. Every memory of everything that he ever said, every look, every thought, every touch, everything. So, so it's nice of you to indulge me. Let's close here. And on this Guru Purnima week, let's send peaceful vibrations around the globe to everyone in need, all of our beloveds, and everything in creation. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy, love and light. And may the light of truth overcome all darkness. Jai Shri Satguru Sachidanandaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Thank you, everybody.